What's the biggest thing psychology as a field misses or underestimates? What's the next step?
No one had told me. I'd been a psychologist 10 years. No one said every moment of your experience is created from thought.
So who we are is always already perfect, always already there.
Yes, that is the only thing that it can explain clearly how things work the way they do.
It is safe to let go when it's hot.
That's a concept. That's a concept. When you're holding something high, you don't need any concepts to let go.
Does it work with everybody?
No. He goes, things I like doing. Yeah, on weekends, I like to set fire to people's apartments. That could have been years of therapy without nearly the same result.
So what is the most common doubt colleagues of yours have?
They innocently misunderstand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
This is huge, Michael.
Maybe those psychologists had a point.
True scientists are curious.
What do you mean that we're being of energy?
Understand that every human being has everything they need to wake up to truth.
There's a biological explanation for that.
Yes.
Today, I'm deeply honored to welcome Dr. Dicken Bettinger to the show. Dicken is a licensed psychologist. He's an educator, a public speaker, an author of this book here, Coming Home, Uncovering the Foundations of Psychological Wellbeing. We'll talk about psychology, we'll talk about well-being, and a lot of other really fun topics. I'm excited and I'm delighted to have you here, Dicken. Welcome to Beyond Skepticism.
Michael, thank you for asking me to do this. I've been looking forward to having a conversation with you about this. And you promised that we would have a deep dive into things, and deep is one of my favorite words, so I'm looking forward.
Me too. The first question is about what got you into psychology? What sparked your interest?
High school students that were having difficulty. I started my career teaching high school English. Michael, I was 22 years old. I looked 16. I was teaching 17 and 18-year-olds. At parents' night, they thought I was a student playing a joke when I stood up and said, I'm your students, your sons and daughters' teacher. But I think because I look so young, at some point, I had so many kids coming to talk to me about their problems and their difficulties. And I had studied quite extensively communication and communication skills, so I would listen very, very carefully, try to validate who they were, where they were coming from, because I loved all my students. I never saw any of them as troublemakers. And so they opened up, and I would share with them some ideas about how they could communicate better with the important people in their lives that they were having difficulty with. And before you know it, I was seeing more students than the guidance counselors. The head of the guidance counselors actually came and talked to me, said, what are you doing? You're seeing more kids than we are. But it started a passion in me. What can I learn for myself that I can share with other people that would help them have an easier time of life? So I taught for a few years, then I went and got my master's in counseling psychology, came back, taught for a couple more years, went and got my doctorate in counseling psychology, all the time just looking for what can I share with people that'll make their lives easier. And I didn't, at the time, I did not like seeing people who were having difficulty as seeing them as having illnesses, mental illness. Because all the kids I worked with in school, I didn't see as having illnesses. They were just struggling. And so I got my degrees in education because their philosophy was if anyone is having difficulty, it's not their fault. They just haven't learned what they need to learn to do better. And so I love that philosophy, and I could see already kids as having well-being. They just get lost in their own minds and struggle and have difficulties. And I would see many, many students as they learned some things on how they could more effectively communicate, things got better for them with their boyfriend or girlfriend or parents or the situations they were in. So it was very rewarding. It just seemed like a natural progression.
Now, you having felt drawn to an understanding of people already being whole, that kind of accelerated as you met Scottish mystic Syd Banks. And that changed your understanding of life and psychology quite a bit, didn't it?
I was a searcher, Michael, big time. When I started exploring what can I learn that will help people have an easier time, I would go to bookstores and I'd go to the psychology section, and then I would go to the section where they had people who had experienced in meditation. Because when I was in high school, I started experimenting with meditation, and it helped me. This quieting down and then would feel better. And I liked that.
Yeah.
And so I looked for psychology and I looked for spirituality in terms of just teachers that had been teaching meditation. And pretty soon there wasn't a book in the bookstore I hadn't read in those two sections, so I'd be waiting for new books to come out. But what was true about every one of those books, every one of those teachers, at the end of the book, they would tell you, this is what you have to do to become healthier. So it's fundamentally based on the premise, you don't have well-being, you have to develop it. And it takes work, and it takes practice, and it takes techniques. So I learned hundreds of practices and techniques, exploring them for myself to see which ones seemed to help me, and then I could share those with other people. So by the time I met Syd Banks, a research study came out from Yale University that there were 450 different approaches to psychology.
And this was a couple of years ago already, right?
I had been a psychologist for 10 years before I met Syd Banks. And so at that point, when I met Syd that same year, this research study came out. So there were all the different fields of psychology were studying something about thinking, something about feeling and emotion, something about behavior. So you have Freud talking about unconscious thought content. You have the there was a backlash against Freud, and you had the behaviorists focusing on behavior. Forget about the unconscious. It's too complicated. Years and years of therapy, free associating, trying to get back to your past, to recover painful memories and make them conscious. That's what Freud called depth psychology. It's not really depth. It was just exploring memories you have stored in your brain. The behaviorists came out in opposition to that. And then after a while, the cognitive therapists, there was a cognitive revolution, promising new possibilities. And each time there would be a whole new, and then there would be fields of study within each of those areas. And so pretty soon there were 450 different approaches for how to improve your thought content, your feelings, or your behaviors.
Right.
That's when Syd came along for me in my life. I had been exploring all of those theoretical approaches. I read at least 3 psychology or spiritual books a week, trying to find, I would follow the thread of anyone who said, do this and it'll help you. And I said, I'll do it. I'll do it. And I want to learn these things to see for myself what's helpful and pass it on.
Before we will dive in today into Syd Banks, into the 3 principles, into your current understanding of psychology, since from what I understood, there's nothing to learn, nothing really to get. What could people focus on, listen towards to? Like one thing that Syd Banks said was listen to the feeling. What does that mean? How do you do that?
I have to explain a little about why Syd Banks his view of psychology was so radically important.
Yeah.
So helpful in my mind, so necessary in terms of every science evolves. And it evolves when one person has a completely new viewpoint about how things work. And so it creates a paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift is a fundamental shift in how we understand a science. Remember I said all of psychology for 200 years was focused on improving thought content, feeling content, behavior content. All of those things are things that have already been created. So we talk about, what are you thinking? What have you been thinking? What were you thinking? What are you feeling? What were you feeling? What happened yesterday? What was so hard? What happened when you were a child? What were you feeling? What was that like for you? What are you feeling now?
Yeah.
What did you do? How did you do it? What can we do to help you improve and change your behaviors? So it's important to understand that before even trying to understand where Syd was pointing, to understand what happened to him. Could I explain?
Yeah.
Because he had 2 major revelations that both of which I feel like continue to unfold and reveal more and more to me as I, for myself, experience the truth of what he saw.
Maybe you could speak a bit about who he was. In the first episode of Beyond Skepticism, I had Michael Neal with me, and he spoke a little bit about the story and who he was. But for those listeners who weren't there, could you explain a little bit who he was?
He had a very difficult childhood, first of all. Grew up in Scotland, poor. It was not probably the healthiest family he grew up in. He was adopted at birth. Challenging childhood, to say the least. He left school at the end of 9th grade because he needed to get a full-time job to work to help support his family. They were that poor. He became a welder. At one point, he moved from Scotland to British Columbia to Vancouver and was working there in a pulp mill, and he was a welder, and he worked as a welder. So, man from Scotland, 9th grade education, a welder, not really exploring psychology, not really exploring spirituality, didn't read about those things, or he was curious maybe, but never really got involved much in them. So, ordinary man. And his wife kept trying to help him because he was so insecure. By his own admission, he was very introverted, very quiet, very insecure, really nice guy, but very, very insecure. And his wife was always trying to help him self-improve.
Right.
So that he could be happier.
Yeah.
She got him involved in Toastmasters, thinking that it's learning how to do public speaking. It's an organization where you meet, and the first assignment was just think about something you can talk about for a few minutes with people, and then just talk for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
He had a panic attack, basically. He couldn't do it. It was too hard for him. He said, this won't work. This isn't going to help me. And so he left that and tried a number of different things. And then his wife said, there's a psychologist coming from New York City to Vancouver. He's famous. This was in the early 70s. I think we should go. He says, there's no way we can afford it. He signed up for it and then called them up and said, no, we can't come. It's too expensive. Signed up for it again. Canceled. Signed up a third time, and they said, oh, Mr. Banks, yes, it's you again. Okay. So he went to this, and it was in the early 70s, which is when I started psychology.
Yeah.
And at that point in time in the evolution of psychology, there was a lot of emphasis on you've got all these painful, old, repressed feelings within you. You have to go inside and find those feelings and cathartic them in order to be healthy. So there was a lot of pounding pillows and getting your anger out and punching things as a way of expressing your upset and a lot of that. And so the guy in this workshop was advocating that. Tell your partner what you most like about them. It's very important you learn to be fully honest with your partner.
Right.
And so very quickly, this very shy, introverted man is going, this is not for me. I can't do this. Yelling, screaming, getting it out. And he was saying to his wife, we made a big mistake. We got to go home. And during a break, he went for a walk on the beach, and another man joined him. And he talked and he said, Syd, it doesn't seem like you're getting much out of this. And he says, I'm not. And he said, why not? I mean, this really can be helpful. And he says, I'm too insecure. So he goes off, this other guy, and later he comes back and he said, Syd, I've been thinking about what you said about you being too insecure. That's the biggest crock I've ever heard. That is just not true. You just think you are. Now, you never know when people are going to have big insights. What Syd heard, or what he realized in that moment, was that every single bit of his unhappiness and insecurity, every bit of it, was just created by his own thinking in the moment. And that when you're not thinking it, that happiness isn't being created, so it doesn't exist. So it's like when we have a nightmare at night and we wake up and we realize, oh, it was just a dream. Thank God it's not real. I'm not really being chased by a bear that's trying to kill me. It's just a dream. Well, he woke up from his daymare that he was insecure, and that every time he'd get upset and be thinking about things, he realized that thinking is what's creating what I'm feeling. When I stop thinking it doesn't exist. This is a very different way of understanding psychology, is that the sole source of everything you're feeling is thought in the moment. And if you're thinking it, you're feeling it. And if you're not thinking it, it's an illusion. It doesn't even exist. It's like a mirage. It just disappears. It's not even true. It's made up. It's a temporary construct at best. He was so impacted by how deeply he saw the truth of that. He didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights, because all of a sudden every single bit of his life made sense. Every single bit of any human's life. In this workshop, he looked around and he saw people thinking up their own suffering and not even knowing they were doing that. So he saw their innocence. I later on heard from friends that he would walk down the street and see people thinking up unhappiness and not realizing it. And he would have so much compassion, he wanted to hug every person. He wasn't a hugger. He just, right? So that was his first insight. Now that alone is, when I started to see the truth of that, it changed my life, because no one had told me. I'd been a psychologist 10 years. No one said, every moment of your experience is created from thought. Every bit, no exceptions. You know what? Everyone was saying, what are you feeling? Oh, it's caused by your environment. You're in a stressful environment. No wonder you feel stress. It's caused by other people and what they say to you. So if somebody says something to you and you get angry, it was caused by the other person, as if their words can somehow create experience in you. It's caused by your past. It's caused by your personality. It's caused by your genetics. It's caused by your DNA. It's caused by your parenting, how you were parented, how you were raised. And here's Syd saying, no, there's only one cause for whatever you think, you will feel. No exception. If you think sad, you'll feel sad. You think anxious, you feel anxious. You think loving, you feel loving. It's changing moment to moment for everybody. And yet, once I started learning that, I traveled the world and I would ask people, what are you feeling? And we have all kinds of feelings. I have all kinds of feelings. I still do. But the next question is interesting. Where do you think it's coming from? I've never met a single person who said, well, it's obvious. It's just what I'm thinking in the moment. It's a thought-created temporary experience, an illusion. Because we've been exposed to the many, many different theories, understandably, by a psychology that's not based in a creative nature of experience. So Syd has his first experience. All of a sudden, he's seeing every human being as a thinker, and he can't help but to have compassion for anyone who is stressed, unhappy, suffering, because they innocently misunderstand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
This is huge, Michael.
Right. Now, let's take it as true that all we ever experience is thinking, is thought. Wouldn't, like, the first question that comes up is, where does that thinking, where does thought come from?
Yeah.
Isn't it possible that maybe those psychologists had a point where the environment and the past may have a role in shaping that thinking that we then experience?
There's no question we have memories. Everybody does. At times, it's normal for memories to be activated. Happens to everybody.
Right.
How involved do you get in that thought? How much truth and reality do you attribute to that thought? Like, I could have the thought, I'm stupid. If I have that thought and it comes into my head and I spend the next hour thinking about that, for an hour I can create misery. If I have that thought and think it's absolute truth, then I start thinking any thought I have must be true. So I can have horrible memories and I can think that's who I am, that's my reality, that's what truth is, and you start believing. So the single source of psychological suffering is a thought comes into your head that's filled with judgment or some what we might call negativity, right. Not judging it, and then think it's true. If you don't think it's true, the thought comes into your head, I'm stupid, and it's just like a bird flying through the sky. Doesn't hurt the sky, doesn't hurt our minds, doesn't hurt who we are, doesn't touch who we are. It's just a passing thought. It's a low-quality thought. These are natural cycles in nature. You inhale, and then you exhale. They're different. You eat food, you eliminate waste. They're different. So the waste is a natural part. Every human being goes up and down in the quality of their thinking. Cycles of that. It's normal.
Right.
And we call those moods. Everybody has moods. Syd Banks did. Everybody. I've never met anybody who the quality of their thinking. Health is going through a low mood without taking that thought to be truth, and you come right back up again. Unhealth is when you come down into a state where your thinking is more judgmental, more critical, more negative, and you get involved in it. And you stay involved in it. And you think that that nightmare you're creating is truth. That's suffering. That's suffering.
So when I'm in a low mood, when I have limited capacity of clarity,
yeah,
wouldn't I have, in a way, also limited capacity to realize that I'm in a low mood? So wouldn't it be self-propagating in a way?
You would think so. You would think so. There's a second part to what Syd realized that helps answer that question truthfully and accurately. Yeah. Are we limited in our capacity to become aware of the fact that we get caught up in thinking that's not helpful?
Yeah.
And I'm going to answer no, but in order to understand that every human being has everything they need to wake up to truth already built into them, you have to understand what Syd realized next. So he comes home from this weekend, and he is just living in exalted feelings because he's living in feelings of understanding. For the first time, he understands how he became insecure, how he was insecure, how insecurity was just him innocently becoming more and more involved in his worry, his anxious thinking, his upset thinking, his self-judgmental thinking. I work with some people, they spend probably 20 hours a day caught up in that thinking, suffering terribly. And they've been told, well, it's genetic or it's biological or they don't know that they're innocently feeding that thinking constantly. So he's sitting in his living room, and his thinking is just flowing because now his insecure thinking and upset thinking and worried thinking is just thought. And if it's natural for it to come and go if you don't give your attention to it and hold on to it. Like in Buddhism, they say the only source of suffering is clinging, attachment, holding. When you're not holding, you're in the flow. If you're deeply in the flow, that's nirvana. No attachment to any thought coming through. Fully present, fully awake, fully alive. So I'm reading my spiritual teachers and studying with spiritual teachers and going on meditation retreats and beginning to experience for myself the normalcy of having thought come and go and the difference between holding and being surrendered in the moment, being open in the moment, being in the flow of life. Very ordinary. Everybody's experienced it. Musicians count on it. Athletes count on it. Artists count on it. And when athletes or artists or musicians get caught up in their thinking, they experience creative blocks, they experience struggle, they experience difficulty, they lose their love and passion for what they're doing. But at any moment, we can wake up out of that difficulty. Okay. Sits in his living room, sitting there. His wife and mother-in-law are in the kitchen, and they do what most people do. They both drop into a low mood and they start arguing. You have to realize every fight that happens in a relationship is two people in a low mood thinking it's a good time to talk about things. It's the only time people fight and argue and disagree and bang heads. Right? So he sees that happening, and now it's totally understandable. And he realizes that's what everybody in the world is innocently doing. Unknowingly, we drop into a low mood, we become opinionated, argumentative, wedded to our beliefs, thinking we're right, you're wrong, you got to change your mind to be like me because I'm right and I know. Right? So he starts laughing at the cosmic humor of, here's the human dilemma. Oh my gosh, unknowingly, innocently, we get caught up in low mood states. They heard him laughing. They assume he's laughing at them. They're pissed. They come into the living room, stand on both sides of a chair, and they go, okay, Syd, what do you think is so funny? And now, put yourself in Syd's place for a moment. 9th grade education, He's experienced directly for himself the illusory nature of thought-created reality. And he's going to try to explain that to his wife and mother-in-law now. And he's going, how am I going to explain? It's all just thought in the moment. It's made up. It's arbitrary. It's created. He stands up and looks out the window. And all of a sudden, there's this big buzzing field of white light in front of him, and he felt like he got drawn into it. Lost all sense of ego, all sense of self, and there was nothing but seemingly infinite field of energy, full of aliveness. There was nothing but this feeling of being connected to the universe, a feeling of everything is perfect as it is, a feeling that would be impossible to explain. He had never had a feeling of this nature. If he talked about it, it would be ecstatic love or impossible to describe. There are many people who have had near-death experiences all over the world. They describe this same process. Go into a tunnel of light. I feel like I've lost my old, conditioned, cramped self. I feel open and expansive. I'm filled with love and compassion. So one time I said, Syd, did you have a near-death experience? And he said, well, I went into that. And in a near-death experience, at some point you go, okay, I'm coming back. And you don't go all the way through. He said, I went all the way through. Now, there is...
This sounds a little up there. Like, it sounds really crazy on first glance.
Well, it does. Well, of course, for anybody. Me too. Anybody. Yeah. And we can't put yourself now in the position of Syd's wife and mother-in-law standing there. And Syd, for 4 seconds, turns around, looks out the window. And when he looks back, he's radiant. He's crying. He says to his wife, Pat, I've come home. I'm free. I've transcended the boundaries of time, space, and matter. He had to look up the word transcend. He had no idea what it meant. It just came out. I've transcended the boundaries. He said, you and I are going to travel the world, and I'm going to share what I've realized with people, and it's going to change the whole field of psychology and psychiatry. Could you imagine being his mother-in-law or wife, hearing him talk that way? Or if you had a friend who suddenly fell over and then got back up and said, oh my God, Michael, you won't believe what I just experienced. And they could not deny that something extremely powerful had just happened to him. It wasn't intellectual. Physically, he changed. He looked different. He went back to work. After that weekend, he went to his locker at this pulp mill. The guy had a locker next to him for 13 years. He didn't recognize Syd. He had changed so much physically. If you imagine if I took out every bit of insecurity, every bit of unhappiness, and you're living in this feeling of deep well-being. I've seen clients who are clinically depressed have insights where they look 10 years younger. This scrunch, just suddenly they soften. They go, oh my God, I didn't know it was possible to feel this good. Well, that's all. He had a shift in consciousness, or an insight, or a realization. I don't care what you call it. He changed. He wasn't the same person. So people could say, well, I have no idea what your experience was, Syd. I'm very skeptical. But they couldn't be skeptical about the fact that he was a different person. And every single person noticed it. So he goes back to work and nothing bothered him anymore. He would do jobs that people used to hate. He said, I'll do it. I don't care. I'm fine with it. Pretty soon his boss's boss, he'd never done this before, asked Syd to come into his office and talk to him for 2 hours. And he opened up about how much difficulty he was having in his life and with his wife. And he walked out feeling much better because Syd just talked to him about what he was realizing to be true about thought, about experience, about we're all the same. We all think. We all can be aware of the fact we think. And that when we go beyond our personal thinking, it's called being fully present. It's not a big deal. It's very ordinary. When he had his enlightenment experience, he said it felt very ordinary. I just was free of concepts. Completely.
So is what you're saying that this man that was never really interested in psychology and spirituality had a kind of spontaneous realization, awakening. He saw something about the nature of the world, and that changed him, and then it impacted many others like you and your view on the world.
After it happened to him, he thought all he would have to do is go to 2 people and it would start spreading through the world. He'd go to a psychologist and say, I've discovered the secret to psychology. Right? It's not looking at the content of thinking, it's looking at where thinking comes from. Now physicists all agree with this. You and I are beings of energy, and we're living in a field of energy. And the field of energy is infinite. And out of that field of energy, things are created. That's the mystery of life.
When you say physicists all over the world agree with that, I need to dig a little bit into that. What do you mean that we're being of energy?
I talked to a biologist, famous biologist. This is after I started having my own insights into, just very simply, very ordinary. I used to worry a lot. I wouldn't call it worry. I'm a doctorate in psychology, and I'm a psychologist, but a lot of my thinking made me anxious. One time a friend of mine said, Dicken, I was telling him about this big problem and, how upset I was getting about the problem. And my friend said to me, Dicken, I don't think the problem is the problem. I think you're just a full-time worrier here. Yeah. I felt insulted. I'm not worrying. He says, what do you think you're doing? I'm thinking about very important things in my life. I have to. He says, well, Dicken, what would you call thinking that makes a person anxious? I was mortified. Oh, my gosh. So one of my very first insights, when I started listening to Syd, because he's just saying every human being thinks. We're constantly, mental activity is being created in us or we wouldn't be alive. We think we're a brain, but the brain is just the computer. You wouldn't call a computer unless it was connected to a source of energy. You wouldn't call it a computer. We have no problem saying there's some kind of energy that has to come into a machine to bring it to life so that it can compute. We have no problem saying there's music in the air all the time and we can't receive it until you get an instrument that can receive that subtle signal, and then you get music or TV, right? So Syd basically says, well, human beings are connected to an energy source, or you would be dead in an instant. There's something creating you, there's something beating your heart, there's something breathing you, there's something generating mental activity. I start just seeing ordinary. I'm sitting in a hotel room by myself, nothing going on, beautiful city, beautiful hotel room, and I start thinking about a meeting coming up a week later. And I know it's going to be contentious. It's controversial topic. And I'm having dialogues in my head with people already. And I'm getting super anxious. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I realize, oh my God, I'm a thinker. And I'm sitting here on a beautiful day, beautiful evening, nothing going on, and I'm thinking up, creating a movie in my head about something that hasn't even happened and isn't happening. And yet I'm just creating my experience with thought. And when I realized that, why would I keep thinking about this if it makes me feel this way? So I just came back to the present moment, stopped thinking about it. Almost immediately I felt better, and I said, oh my God, it can't be that easy. See, now, this is taking what Syd realized, and he would say, don't listen to my words. You find out. You see if you can't realize that when you start feeling tension, that you've left the present moment and are thinking about something. And when you realize that it's that thinking creating this feeling, it'll bring you right back to the present moment, no technique. If you're holding something too hot, if I gave you a hot coal or a sharp object and you started squeezing it and you felt pain, the instant you realized the pain came from what you were doing, you wouldn't ask me, what are the techniques for letting go of this object?
Right.
How do I do it? There must be like 7 steps. Come on, don't let me. I watched my grandson fall against the glass door over a hot wood fire. Blistered his hand. He didn't need any lesson for taking his hand off the stove.
Right.
Now I'm watching, I start seeing in my own life when I realize it's the holding of hot thought, if you will, that's creating this feeling. Why would I keep holding? This is how people how people become resilient. This is how people can get upset and be over it very quickly. And how other people keep thinking about it and analyzing and judging and trying to figure out what to do and how to deal with it. And it innocently, it just keeps it alive. Innocently, they're just holding on to it and thinking about, now, how do I open my hand? Do I do just my thumb, or I do this, or how shall I do it, and how does that work? And so Syd would say, if you really see that you're holding thought, it'll naturally bring you back to the present moment. Then that thinking flows, falls away. What are you left with? Presence. Just ordinary. You become more awake, more aware, more conscious, more present. When people are in the present moment, they then can have access to this deeper wisdom, this deeper well-being, this deeper knowing. So when people are in crisis situations, they don't say to them, think up a storm. They say, stay calm.
Now, that doesn't sound like good advice to just let go. That sounds more like a philosophical statement of truth. Like it is safe to let go when it's hard.
That's a concept. That's a concept. When you're holding something high, you don't need any concepts to let go. If you have concepts about letting go, you might think about letting go for a long time while you're holding something hot.
Right.
You have great concepts. This has nothing to do with creating a better concept. It's the instant we're free of concepts, there's knowing. We're connected to a deeper intelligence.
Okay. What is that deeper intelligence?
I don't know, but I know it works. I'll tell you. You drive a car.
Yes.
If you're driving and thinking, you're in trouble. I've talked to state police who say the only source of accidents ever is people are distracted for longer periods of time and then they hit something, drive off the road. Doesn't happen when people are fully present. If you are thinking about things or looking for your CD or changing the channels, you're not fully present. So when people drive, most people, most of the time, let go of their thinking and become more present in order to drive. It's just natural. Makes sense. Doesn't make sense to be overthinking. You don't want to be in a car with a driver who's constantly thinking about things.
So does it never make sense to hold on to thinking?
I'll get to that. You're talking about, so you're driving your car and you said, what's wisdom? What's this deeper intelligence? When people get fully present, there's a different kind of knowing that's not of the intellect. For example, we're driving here through Denmark, fast roads, other cars coming really fast. Whoever's driving the car, their hands are constantly moving. They're not using their intellect to figure out, should I do it an inch? Should I do it this far? When do I come back? They're not using concepts in order to drive. I played sports. Anybody who plays sports will learn about being in the zone. When you're thinking about things, it's hard to learn in a sport. It's hard to get better. People who get caught up in their thinking during their event make mistakes, don't become good team players, lose their competitive skills. So they talk about being in the zone where you're not holding on to thought. You're fully present. And then you know where to go. Watch Lionel Messi play soccer. He just walks down the field looking around, and it's just, he's not thinking about it. He's just getting a sense where everybody is and where the game is and where is it moving. And then all of a sudden he knows where to go. That's very ordinary in sports. Just trusting that deeper knowing. Musicians know about that. I know you know about that, Michael.
Right. Now, I won't fight you on that. What I'm curious about is that always true? Like, is that something that's just true versus is that something that most of the time just works really well? And how do you know? How do you know the distinction?
All I know is when I started learning this, I started having less thinking that burdened me. And I started being more fully present. And when I was more fully present, I started having naturally more feelings of well-being without trying, without working on it, without developing it. And when I'm present, my mind is quiet and I have nice feeling. Anything I do is easier. I went into companies for 16 years, Michael, and taught top executives, engineers, scientists, no exception. When people had less thinking that created tension, stress, confusion, ambivalence, upset, uncertainty, when they had less of that thinking and more presence, they enjoyed their work more, they made better decisions, they communicated better, they felt like we can solve any problem. I work with a guy who taught advanced theoretical physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was perhaps, IQ-wise, the smartest person I had ever met. He had 3 handprints to get into his office because his work was so top secret. I said, "Can you tell me what you're doing?" He said, "I could. I would have to kill you." And he came to see me because he would at times get stuck in being very impatient with people who he didn't think were smart, just discouraged. He'd have a temper that translated not only at work, but with his kids at home. His kids called him Attila the Hun. In very little time, you think, you're a conscious being, you can be aware of the fact that you think. When your mind is clear, you're connected. That deeper intelligence is always there and will bring you something helpful if you're open and receptive. It will bring you something helpful for you in that moment, given your situation and what you're doing. That's why for centuries, people have talked about this, it's been called wisdom. An intelligence that it operates through nature. I watch flowers in front of my house grow, and then how they turn toward the sun and follow the sun and close up. I watch trees grow, and every branch is trying to find the greatest area of light. You get 2 trees. This tree creates this half of the leaf cover. This tree creates the other half. You get 3 trees, they each share that light space, and they never touch. Rare is the scientist who doesn't start talking about, oh my gosh, there's a intelligence behind nature, intelligence behind life, an intelligence that helps you cut yourself, and the immune system knows how to bring you what you need for healing. I cut myself terribly, and just watching it heal day after day is just, psychologically, we didn't know we have that built-in immune system.
Well, there would be a very easy explanation why there is an intelligence in our body, because it would provide us more fitness, to survive, to reproduce. Yeah. There's a biological explanation for that.
Yes.
You speak about an intelligence that is not stuff, that is not form, that is kind of something that is beyond putting into words, beyond making it, beyond studying it, observing it as form. Is that correct?
It's really impossible to explain formless intelligence. It's impossible to explain the quantum field. You can use words, you can point toward it, you can talk about it. You can say that in subatomic physics, out of nothing, there's temporary condensations of energy that then go back into that quantum, as many physicists describe neutrinos, protrinos, temporary condensations of energy. Then you talk about possibility and probability of occurrence, and how do you describe that? I can't describe what Syd calls the three principles.
Mm.
The universal power of thought, which is the capacity of this field of life energy to create life and create specific life.
Right.
I can't describe this infinite field of how the field itself is conscious, so that any atom, any cell that's created has awareness, because it's made of awareness. A one-celled amoeba knows how to move away from light or toward food, or there's awareness built into everything that's created. That awareness built into human beings, meditators have been talking about for centuries. They talk about consciousness as the field in which we live. We don't have consciousness inside of us. We're physical beings inside an infinite field of consciousness. There have been people for centuries in every single culture who in a quiet mind have intuited the truth of that. The fact that they intuited that isn't important, but when they had that realization, the quality of their life shifted and improved tenfold, dramatically, 100-fold.
I wonder if that's the case, why doesn't it kind of spread, become more mainstream? Because at the moment, my intuition is materialistic thinking is becoming more and more widespread from the more dualistic thinking that people had, like we have a body, I have a mind, those are two different things. Now more and more people think it's actually just one, it's actually just matter, and in some way, and there's a problem with that, it's called the hard problem of consciousness. In some way this matter constructs consciousness, but then what you're pointing to, or at least what I was hearing was the opposite. It's like it's all consciousness. And matter, form is just like a projection of consciousness, or it's inside of consciousness. Can you talk a bit about that?
I was working as a psychologist in the state of Vermont, in the northeast corner of the United States. Syd Banks, as far as I know, was the first person that really brought together the universal dimension of life is connected to the psychological dimension. They're not separate. They're connected. They're all part of one system. So we're already connected to the intelligence of life. Everybody. We're already connected to a creative energy. Otherwise, aliveness would not happen in humans.
How do you know? If you say that, wouldn't there be at least a possibility of matter combining in a certain way that creates a certain feeling, that provides a certain, maybe even reliable source of intelligence and wisdom?
That theory can't explain all the exceptions. When it's only physical, it can't explain why in the most stressful events in the world, it doesn't create stress in people. There are now 600 research studies that show stressful events don't create stress in people. And that's what's being taught, that's what's believed, that's what everybody believes. People have believed that for centuries because they go, I feel stress. It's not being created. It has to be coming from something outside me. So let me see what's causing me stress. The World Trade Center, the planes hit the Trade Center, collapsed. Hundreds of people being affected. Afterwards, they interviewed tons of people. What did they find? It's fascinating. It was one of the most interesting shows I've ever seen, was people who were inside the building who got out and then interviewed. One person they interview. When the building's shaking and falling apart, they dove under their desk and were paralyzed by fear and could not move. Now that's understandable, isn't it? That probably would have been me. I would, oh my God. Right. That's understandable. But there were also many, many, many people in that situation who didn't experience stress. They got calm. And that's often true in any crisis situation. You never know who's going to feel what or experience what in that kind of a situation. Many, 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 many people stayed calm. And not only that, there were some people that felt love and compassion, not calm, not fear, not paralysis, not anger. But all of those are possible because whatever we think we're going to experience, it's not good or bad. It's not saying you shouldn't experience anything. I get stressed, I get upset, I get all kinds of feelings, but it makes a difference when I know where it's coming from. I'm living in a thought-created experience. Because I have free will, I can keep thinking about something that comes into my mind, or I can let it go.
We're going to talk about free will a little bit later. For now, what also spikes my curiosity is, if we go with all those psychological phenomena, we can still explain it based on it being helpful to stay calm in times of trouble. I mean, just for pure survival, that just makes sense, So it would make sense that it is built in. If we go with that link between thoughts and experience, would we really need an underlying idealist I guess not. I'm not saying understanding, but would it really be necessary that at the essence all is consciousness for it to make sense to have, like, for example, psychotherapy modality like the rational emotive behavioral therapy? Like what it does, it posits that people have erroneous beliefs about situations they're involved in, and that these beliefs they cause disturbance but can be disputed and changed.
I used to spend hours every day writing down my thoughts, examining them, exploring the flaws in those, reframing them, recreating them, and it did make me feel better. But I was sleeping 4 hours a day and working on myself the rest of the time because I was doing reframing, I was doing affirmation. I had trained myself to wake up at the end of REM sleep. I had 5 full-length dreams I had to work on every night. All of these things, I was meditating 4 hours a day. All of those things were helping me. I had journals, unstructured journals, every day. I had my wife said, Dicken, I've never met anybody who works harder on themselves than you do. And I took it as a compliment. She said, basically, you're preoccupied constantly with yourself. I didn't understand that until later. I mean, the more education I had, the more thinking I did about what I could do to improve myself for my clients.
Right.
So I'm spending less and less time fully present.
So is that kind of the implication that makes a difference? That if we all are pure consciousness at essence, and if your universal mind, as Syd called it, we are already complete. So there isn't a necessity to improve anything about who we are.
The third principle is the principle of mind, which says there's a deeper intelligence built into the fabric of who we are and of life. So when I get quiet, wisdom may point me toward doing something that would look like self-improvement. I might say, write down what's on my mind. It might occur to me, but I'm not doing it as a technique that every day I would have to do that. It might occur to me to sit down quietly in a quiet meditative state, but it's no longer a technique, it's just occurring to me. I was teaching a meditation class when I started having insights into the principles. So I was teaching my meditation class techniques of letting go and opening up and being present.
Right.
And I'm teaching my clients the principles with no techniques. Just this is how we work. We think. We're either aware of that or we're not. We're connected to something that as we quiet down, that intelligence helps us with common sense, clarity, perspective, insight, intuition.
Right.
Right? Just this is how we work.
How do you know that that is true for everybody? Usually what kind of separates anecdotal evidence from, something we know is through proving it.
I get asked that a lot. I understand
this
that
isn't
question.
provable, right, in essence?
I used to travel the world talking theoretical psychological theories, and everybody would argue with me because every culture, every society, every person has different beliefs, different ideas. So you can argue ideas. When I learned the principles, I traveled the world and I said, you think. You're a thinker. No argument. I've never... No, I'm not. I say, you have built into you awareness. No argument. Working with those engineers for years, they were trying to find something to argue with. The logic of this was too hard to argue with because it was true.
Now, I wonder about the third one, the being connected to something deeper, because I could imagine that some people would argue that in some sense.
You have, like how I would say to the engineers, your mind is capable of far greater things than we realize. And you have a potential for new thought, so that it's always possible to have a new thought about something. That's one way of talking about a deeper, formless intelligence, is the potential for new and fresh thought. Never found anybody that argued with that. Anywhere I went, in big companies, they loved this because it helped people be less stressed, more present, enjoyed their work more. In a quieter, clearer mind, people communicate 10,000 times better when they're caught up in stressful or anxious thought. Right. People caught up in stressful, anxious thoughts make lots of mistakes. People who begin to say, we need to think about this problem, but we can't just use the same old thinking to solve it. We gotta come up with something new. And where a whole team of people sits back reflectively and go, what about this? What if we did this? What about this? You know that physicist I was telling you about, the 3-hand print guy? After he learned these principles and started keying in on our connection to a deeper intelligence that can bring new and fresh thinking, he went to the president of the company and said, give me your insolvable problems. My team will solve any problem you think is insolvable. This is the third largest defense contracting company in the world. This is a multi-billion-dollar company. They had problems they were trying to solve and resolve. And he was saying, my team can solve anything. He said, we'll lock ourselves into a room. You just send in food. We'll stay here. And we're a bunch of brilliant people who now not only have beautiful intellects to utilize, but we also have a trust in the capacity to generate new and fresh thinking. And we will use the combination of those two to solve any problem. That's very cool. I mean,
yeah.
And he did. He would.
Yeah.
He said, give me a problem. A problem is just a potential waiting to reveal itself.
Yeah. I'll come back to a question I already asked you. This sounds miraculous. This sounds amazing. This sounds as if it would be so beneficial for humanity overall. Why isn't it wider spread? Why aren't there?
It is. Michael, you don't know it is really widespread. When I learned this, I was the only person in the Northeast United States. You'd have to go to central U.S.
Right.
or down to Florida to find anyone else who was talking about 3 principles.
Right.
Just little old me, I brought tons of speakers to Vermont to talk to institutions, universities, groups. We had annual conferences. I brought the annual conference to Burlington, Vermont. Pretty soon there's centers opening up.
Yeah.
Right now we have 17. I'm part of the board of 3 Principles Global Community. There are people in every single country that are teaching these principles. I did a week-long seminar for anyone in the Ukraine who is experiencing war and having difficulty. And we opened it up to any people in the surrounding countries who wanted to join. We had 400 people for a week. People calling in from bomb shelters in the Ukraine who were so grateful to learn that if you become aware of holding thought, there's a natural tendency to not keep, like if you're pinching yourself and in pain, you don't know that pinching yourself is causing the pain, you won't stop. But as soon as you realize, you stop. And that when your mind quiets, when any human being mind quiets down, we just call it becoming more fully present. People start to feel better. And when people feel, it might be for someone in a war zone. I've been in that situation, by the way. That's another story. But coming into this space of presence, there's a different feeling. And in that feeling, there's more of that knowing and intelligence. And so it's possible, even in the worst of situations, to become more fully present and bring more loving kindness to the people around you and be of help, be of service. It's getting beyond your ego, so it's not about me, it's about how can I help you? And watching that happen time and time again in families, in corporations, in people in the worst of situations. So I've been doing programs for people in the Middle East. I'm doing programs for people in refugee camps in Africa who have witnessed unimaginable horrors, their own family members slaughtered in front of them, their own eyes, who are finding it's all thought. Beyond thought is presence. In presence, there's deeper feeling. In deeper feeling, there's a guidance that can help you live a loving, kind life. No exception. I've seen no exceptions to that. I've gone into prisons. I teach this to guys who were filled with rage and lived a life of rage and were in violent gangs and finding their well-being because they already have it. It's spiritual. It can't be damaged. It's formless. It can't be hurt or damaged. Anybody who quiets down has access to the radio waves of life that can play a music through you that's uplifting. So people who are in horrific circumstance can find a quiet kindness, a peace of mind, a clarity. It doesn't mean we live there all the time. I certainly don't. Follow me around. I'm an ordinary schmuck. I get into all kinds of thoughts and caught up. But more and more, when I'm feeling this, it's no longer a curse and a problem. It's a biofeedback system to wake me up to the now. So it's thank God I feel stressed and upset and tense. It lets me know when I'm using my intellect unwisely, when I'm holding concepts and thoughts in a way that's not helpful.
Yeah. Also, a quite refreshing way of thinking about negative or constraining feelings. I'd love to go into that maybe after the break. I have a couple last questions left.
Yeah,
sure. Since I may have been mistaken about the degree of spread of those principles, with the impact you described, like over and over today in all those different fields with all those different people, and to such a intense degree, I can imagine it would be not too difficult to providing clinical proof of a therapy modality or something like that working amazingly well. I didn't find many studies.
I can show you.
Oh,
we got them now.
I'm especially interested in double-blind studies, and can you speak a little bit about the studies we have in that field?
I'm not a researcher, and I don't claim to know anything about research. And I've been more interested in personally and in my profession of finding what can help relieve human suffering and what's the most direct path to that. That's what I'm interested in, are results. I could tell you stories all day long of people that said they're incurable, they have a mental illness, they're going to have this for the rest of their life, and people having insight into the principles that relieve them of chronic stress. Without chronic stress, there is no mental illness. There's no depression. There's no ongoing anxiety or problems. There's no what we would label as being mental illness. It doesn't exist as people gain understanding, and all of that negative thinking stops meaning something and can flow through. So go into a state hospital and see someone, and even in their current condition, there will be times when they become present, and when they do, they become friendly and sane and lucid.
Yeah.
Not hallucinating, just present, and then they get caught up in thought, and they've been told that there's something flawed with them and they have an illness, and that belief held creates havoc for people. So Syd Banks comes along and he says, Dicken, you have perfect mental health inside of you already, but for your thinking that's covering it up. No one had ever told me that as a psychologist for 10 years, that every human being has perfect well-being inside. It's just the way in which we use the tool of thought that determines our experience of our well-being or not. I cried because it rang true to me. And I saw that when I let go of everything I was thinking, I didn't lose anything of importance. I lost my tension, my stress, my preoccupation, my worries, my judgments, my shoulds. And here I am, just me, Dicken, present without all that static in the attic, and just in life, and just for no reason start to feel better. It's an unconditioned positive feeling. And then when I have a quiet mind and feel good, unbelievable how well I can deal with family crises or friends and struggling or...
And again, the impact of it sounds just amazing.
It is amazing. I'm still shaking my head. This is why I get excited. I'm 77. I wake up excited. I can't wait to share this. I just did a 4-day seminar with 80 people, and just sharing this with those people and watching them go, oh my God. And I'm not telling them what to do, how to live. I'm just pointing them toward what's already true. You think, you're aware, you're connected to a deeper intelligence that knows how to create well-being.
And we're going into that in the second half a lot. I will repeat my question. What about the studies?
there are researchers now who for years have been doing research and collecting that. One is a professor named Thomas Kelly. There are other researchers that I know that, so I can point people toward where they are, but it's not part of what I do or am concerned with. Somebody brings me their 7-year-old child and said, I'm not sure my child is normal because he only wants to hang out and play and be with adults. He doesn't like to play with kids. Can you test him? Now, I know there's tests that can be done and people that can test, but I said, I don't do testing, but I would be glad to meet with your son and give you my professional opinion about how well your son is doing or not. 7-year-old boy. He walks into my office, and a little blonde-haired kid, and he walks straight toward me, looking at me, and he goes, oh, hi, you must be Dicken. It's really nice to meet you. How are you doing? I was blown away. He wasn't saying, how you doing?
Yeah.
He was saying, how are you doing? Fully present.
Yeah.
Alive. And I was taken aback. I rarely meet people that present.
Yeah.
And I sat back, Michael, and I go, wow, this is how I'm doing. I was honest with him. This is how I'm doing. He says, so Dicken, what do you do? And I said, well, I like to talk to people and help them realize they have what they need inside of themselves. What do you mean? Like, what do you say to them? And I'm going, okay, this little Buddha, I want to see how he responds to the universal truth of these principles. So I started talking to him like I've been talking to you about the principles. We're connected to the potential for thought and new thought. We're all aware beings. We're all connected to a deeper intelligence. And when we're caught up in thought, we can suffer. When we realize that, we quiet down, learn the benefit of being more fully present and quiet. We feel better. We think better. You know what he says to me? I know exactly what you mean. I say, you do. Tell me. He goes, well, Dicken, sometimes when I don't know what to do, I'll go to my bed and I lie down, and it's like I'm going asleep, but I don't go to sleep. Do you know what I mean? I'm going, Syd, is that you? Are you playing games with me here? It's like, I'm getting goosebumps all over my body. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful descriptions of it's like we can, at times, it's like we're going to sleep, but we relax deeply and we come intensely awake and alive and alert. That's how many of the top Buddhist meditation teachers will talk about what meditation is, or what the monastic field would call contemplative prayer. A quiet, open, receptive mind to something greater coming in. Getting out of the way, getting ego out of the way. So I say to him, because now I'm the student, I'm not kidding. I truly, that's what I love about the principles. We're on equal ground here. And I say, can you say anything more about that? And he goes, well, it's like I fall asleep, but I don't. And at a certain point, Dicken, I always feel better. And as soon as I feel better, I know exactly what to do. I felt like, okay, thank you very much. How much do I owe you for this session? I had a massive insight listening to him say that. So for like 3 weeks after that, I'm walking around in this space of quiet, and anytime I'd start to get a little tense, I'd hear his voice. It's like I'm falling asleep, but I don't fall asleep. At a certain point, I feel better. When I feel better, I know what to do. And that became like the simple understanding of the principles that I carried with me for weeks, and it just kept deepening and deepening. That was Syd. That's what Syd says. He says, all I've ever told people, it's all thought. Look within. Beyond the noise of your thinking, always there's an inner quiet, always, for any human being. And in that quiet, beyond concepts, there's a feeling that's uplifting. And when you're in a quiet mind and a nice feeling, that intelligence will guide you through life perfectly. He says, that's all I've ever told people. It's so simple. He said, I've been telling people that for 30 years now. Everybody gets excited. Nobody looks in that direction or nobody does that. He was semi-joking.
Yeah.
Because no one can think about this and gain that understanding. It's an experiential realization that it is true that I'm sometimes caught up in thought and it creates tension, stress, and upset. It is true that when I fall beyond that thinking, there's a peaceful quiet that's always there. It is true when I step into that space, I start feeling happier for no reason. It is true when my mind is quiet and I'm filled with feeling of that nature, I become a better husband, a better father, a better worker at work. I enjoy more deeply whatever I'm doing. I can bring my best to the occasion. There's less ego and more kindness and service just built into us. So I keep coming back now, Michael, to that simplicity so that the principles don't remain intellectual to me.
If simplicity is of value, why not just stick with, I think you mentioned multiple spiritual traditions that said the same thing in your words?
It's very complicated, and each one had different ideas and beliefs and techniques and theories and practices. But at core of each of those would be the principles.
So it's just the practices and maybe dogma or whatever else that would be. We take that away, and the principles is what's left?
That's what's left.
Why 3, though? Why not just, you said in your book, in page 102, in essence, who you are is the awareness of the dance of life in that context. Why not just say we are pure consciousness? Why make 3?
Throughout my understanding of this, my meager understanding, because you're asking why use a trinity to explain ultimate reality, which is inexplainable. That's how I hear that question. And it's been asked for centuries.
That's exactly what I meant, Dicken.
And it's very interesting that all the great spiritual teachers, Jesus, Buddha, in Hinduism, the great realizers, in Sufism, and always talk Trinity. We said, Syd, why don't you just say there's one principle? Because he would say, in truth, there's only one principle. Infinite field of energy, temporary condenses into form. It's the same energy in form, and it goes back into the same energy. It's all one. It's all the same. So my clients would come to see me. They'd say, Dicken, I'm fighting with my wife, and I'm going, it's all one. It's all one. That's truth. There's only one You're not separate from your wife. You're all. So Syd would say it'd be a very short conversation and people wouldn't get anything out of it. So there are essential qualities to the formless creative energy of life. Let's say the great nothingness, whatever you want to call it, energy, quantum field, silence, the universe, things appear within that field. So it's creative, principle of mind. There's a creative force that knows how to create and operate what it creates as an intelligent creative force. People have said that for centuries. It's a conscious force. Because as we realize that more, we become more conscious. We start living at a higher level of consciousness. What's a low level of consciousness? You're so blinded by the content of your own thinking, you don't see truth. You don't see life. I was so preoccupied with thinking, I'd come home, here I am, doctorate, psychologist, I come home, I'm preoccupied, my kids are calling me space cadet, because I'm so preoccupied. I'm the absent-minded professor. My wife comes over and playfully knocks on my forehead and goes, "Hello, Dicken, are you in there? Are you going to come out tonight and play, or are you going to stay in there all night?" I got a lot of important things to think about. Don't. It's all innocent. It's all innocent. So.
So is it in a way arbitrary if it's 3 or 4 or 5? Because in essence it's 1. And then, I mean, if it is a way to try to point to, speak about, share, feel a truth that is beyond grasping, because it is the context in which life happens and not a part of life.
Yeah.
It's all metaphor, right? It's all, no word that we talk today is truth. No.
You can only use metaphor to talk about this. The 3 principles are helpful because they're universal. So I can talk to people about the power of thought creating experience to anybody in the world. I can talk about awareness and how we move in and out of different levels of consciousness. Where everybody's experienced being really fully present. Everybody's experienced being caught up and seems dark and small and limited, and everybody's experienced that shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
Everybody can relate that there's some source to life. Even all the agnostics I've worked with believe there's something creating. They don't like concepts of God, which paradoxically is, this teaching helps people move beyond their concepts of anything into a deeper truth.
So are the 3 principles just a really, really good metaphor?
Anything we say about principles, it's like for a huge part of human history, people didn't understand there was an invisible force that helped bring objects together. And somebody has a Galileo, apparently sitting under an apple tree, the apple falls, he has an insight about there's a formless force that can explain this. And then he started looking at everything that couldn't be explained in science that can now be explained by understanding gravity. So we can use the word gravity, and it can either be a pointer or it can be a field of energy. So metaphors are trying to point towards something that can be seen or experienced or realized as true.
So are the 3 principles a really good metaphor? Just a really good metaphor? Are they true?
I'm always trying to get people to go beyond their conceptual mind and metaphors, and then you don't even think about the principles. You just live your life. I don't walk around thinking about, oh, I'm in the principle of thought, and now I need to access the principle of consciousness. And no, as Syd would say, just go and enjoy yourself. And if at some point you're not enjoying yourself, if you realize it has something to do with the thoughts you're caught up in, it'll bring you right back to the now where you can start enjoying life again. Don't complicate this. Go have fun. Stop thinking about it. We're at a picnic one time, and we're all talking about the principles, and we're not even seeing nature. We're not even in our bodies. We're in our heads talking about the principles, and Syd turns around and said, would you please? It's such a beautiful night. Let's just come back. It was funny. I mean, he had a great sense of humor. He was always teasing us and joking around. And,
Well, let's keep on speaking after the break.
Okay.
You mentioned free will. You mentioned us always having the possibility of engaging with a thought or not engaging with a thought. Now, what if it doesn't occur to us to disengage with a thought? What if it doesn't occur to us that it is a thought and it seems just real?
Nice question. Thank you. Can we talk just for a second about levels of consciousness?
Of course.
Which for me is the same thing as a level of the degree to which you've realized the principles. So at a low level of consciousness, people have strong experiences, but they haven't realized the source of it. They haven't realized it's created from thought. They haven't realized that they're the thinker. They haven't realized that they're connected to a deeper intelligence that can help them live a beautiful life. They haven't realized they have innate well-being. Often, people at lower levels of consciousness have great difficulty in life. At much lower levels of consciousness, people end up being in prison or mental institutions or some kind of institution. At higher levels, people live with enormous degrees of stress, and it's often acted out. But as people have insights into the principles, they can jump to higher levels of well-being, higher levels of consciousness. They'll still have moods at every level, but they'll have more understanding. So someone like Syd Banks was graced or fortunate enough to have a massive insight that took him to a much higher level of understanding. So he went from being an insecure welder to speaking at universities, speaking to auditorium full of doctors and physicists. And
can I cut in for a second?
yeah.
You just said he was an insecure welder. Like when I try to get what you were pointing to during the first half of our conversation, he never was really insecure. So what changed? Is that what you mean? And please correct me. Isn't who he was the only thing that changed is what he saw?
His true nature didn't change, but because of his level of understanding, which was very low, he got caught up in a lot of thinking that he thought was true, and that created a lot of insecure feeling, tension, anxiety, stress. So it's both true that at that level he was very insecure, but in his core, in truth, in who he was, there's no insecurity in our true nature.
Right.
So both are true. One is just talking about, given a person's level of understanding, that person, you or me or anybody, is at that level doing the best they can given what they understand about life.
So who we are is always already perfect, always already there.
Yes.
There's no need to change anything about who we are. What can change and what does have an impact is our understanding.
Yes.
So it's
So that's why Syd would equate levels of understanding or realization with levels of consciousness.
right.
Okay, free will.
Yeah.
When I've worked with people who are suffering terribly and they spend enormous amount of time in low moods, and then they take that thinking seriously and they tend to act out of that thinking, which can be either anger or fear or some kind of unkind behaviors. They're doing the best they can given what they're thinking and what their understanding is. But I've seen people that I've worked with have insight and jump to much higher levels of consciousness, where all of a sudden they're not acting out of their low moods. They're not caught up in them so much. They are more resilient. They get over their upset much more quickly. At lower levels of consciousness, people tend to feel bad and blame it on somebody or something in life. At higher levels, as people go up, they take more and more responsibility for everything they're experiencing. They don't blame. Like I used to get upset and say, it has something to do with my wife or our relationship. We got a problem. We got to talk. And so in a low mood, I'd come say, we got to talk. And all of us have the capacity to have insight that can take us to higher levels. Syd, when he had his enlightenment experience, didn't say, I've arrived, I've achieved something, I've accomplished something. He said, now I'm just beginning to be open to possibility and newness. It's just, there's infinite levels of consciousness. No human being can claim, I couldn't possibly be more loving, more creative, more understanding, more compassionate. Why? Is it because there's no limit on what's possible in terms of our well-being. When I work with clients at a very low level of consciousness, they don't even realize that they're thinking and that they have a choice. So to tell them, you have a choice. You're a thinker. When you feel this way, you have a choice. You can let go of that thinking. It's enormously helpful for someone who has felt victimized by life and helpless to say, no, you're an agent in this. You have a choice.
I don't think hardly anybody will disagree how helpful it is to perceive a reality, a world, a life where we have a choice. Do we, though?
Okay. At higher levels of consciousness, you're not thinking about making a choice. Choice happens. Choice still happens. You put your hand on a hot stove, you may not think about it, but choice happens. So at higher levels, that's why in Christianity they say, as you come higher with greater realization of the true nature of love being the true nature of life, you start saying, not my will, but thy will be done. It's like a professional drummer, musician friend of mine who says, I used to play and was always thinking about my playing. And as I got out of my way, he'd say, I love it when the other guy shows up. In other words, we get out of our way. Many, many creative people have experienced, I didn't write this poem. Bill Moyer's interviewing a young Chinese poet had become sort of everybody was going, wow, amazing poetry. And Bill Moyer's interviewed him and he says, so how is it that you write your poetry? And he said, well, to tell you the truth, I don't feel like I write it. I get into a very quiet state and then it just starts coming to me and I just write it down. So it's the same with free will. Do we have a choice? I think ego can try and make choices and say, I have a choice or I don't. But the wisdom and intelligence behind life makes choices for life all the time. Look at the plant comes up like this, and you could say there's a choice that happens because it knows how to turn toward the light, to bring more light into it that it can turn into energy so it can continue to grow.
So let me paraphrase what I heard, and you tell me if I'm off.
Okay.
First, and we never digged into that, but the first assumption, or maybe you wouldn't call it assumption, but something to recognize, is that there is truth. It's not that nothing is true. There is truth. There is something that's
There's
independent.
always something here that doesn't come and go is another way of saying that.
Okay. Now, there are levels of consciousness which, from what I heard, kind of were the degree of what, of my confusion or clarity about what's true. So if I'm in a low level of consciousness, what I'm experiencing is kind of further away from truth than when I'm at a higher level of consciousness.
I see what you're saying.
So if that's how it works, and we can see that there seems to be a very beneficial realization of free will in lower levels of consciousness, and at some point with a higher level of consciousness, free will seems neither necessary, not really there. Could we say that at a deeper level, it's obvious that there's no free will?
I don't know. I don't think about it that much. I mean, really, what I know is that when people are caught up in their thinking, they get out of harmony with life and out of harmony in their relationships and at work. And no matter who the person is, we are utilizing ideas to try and analyze life or label life or decide what to do. All of that is personal thinking based on concepts. So that's what Syd would define as ego. So a lot of our lives, we're trying to use our ego, which is why when almost all adults, when they feel tension, stress, or upset, they do more thinking. With greater understanding, when people feel tension, stress, or upset, they do less thinking. It's like, let go and let God. Get out of the way so that you can be more fully present and more responsive. There's a responsive intelligence rather than when you're caught in old thinking, it's a reactive stance toward life. So Syd would say when you understand the principles, you become more in harmony with the way life is actually working. You get aligned with the way the universe actually works rather than ego thinking, I know better what to do and how to do it than some universal intelligence.
Well, you said there is something that doesn't come and go. Does free will come and go, or is it a constant?
It's a concept ultimately, of course. It's a concept that can be a helpful pointer toward people at a certain level of consciousness. At another level, you wouldn't use that concept. It wouldn't even occur to you to talk about free will.
I appreciate the honesty regarding that.
It's definitely a concept that for some people can be helpful, so it makes sense to use that as a pointer
Right.
about there's a deeper knowing that can choose.
Right.
But if you say that to somebody at a really low level, it can sound impractical and mystical, and
Right.
and so you say you can choose whether you hold that thought or let it go. And I'm meaning the big you.
Yeah.
And they're thinking at first, little me, ego, can make those choices. But then they see when I do make those choices, I feel better. And then more and more, it's like learning to ride a bicycle. It feels like you're doing it, and then it gets easier, and then you don't think about it, and then you're not thinking about it.
Given free will is a concept, and given there's this ultimate reality, this intelligence, this you call not it wisdom, but you say that the mind operates kind of through wisdom. Why are there so many people suffering in our world?
Because they're caught up in their personal thinking it's true.
Yeah.
And that is what suffering is.
Now, why doesn't wisdom and all its capability and strength and power and unlimited clarity provide those people with insights?
This does.
Well, why doesn't it provide them with insights they can recognize, taking into account their limited level of consciousness? Since we just established that there's no free will, they can't really do better as they do, right? Choosing to listen or not listen to wisdom. Why is there suffering?
Wisdom is always operating. It's always operating. When I feel this way, that's the intelligence of life letting me know that I'm caught in thought. But if I don't understand that, I won't know wisdom is operating. I won't know this is wisdom.
Yeah.
I won't. It's like having an alarm clock that goes off and you have no clue what that noise is.
Yeah.
Or you don't know that that's inviting you to wake up.
Why isn't it built in for us to know? Or is it?
It's always built into everybody.
Right.
When I worked with one man who had been sent to me by the court, mandated to come into therapy. And he was in and out of prison constantly. He had so many DUIs that they took away his license, says you'll never drive in the rest of your life. He came in and I was just trying to get to know him, and I said, so do you have any things you like doing? Like, do you have any hobbies? He goes, things I like doing. Oh, yeah, on weekends, I like to set fire to people's apartments that have pissed me off. And people burned down my apartment. I really enjoy now getting them back. And I said, well, this is not exactly what I had in mind for a hobby. It's like there's something you just enjoy doing. And he says, oh, okay, I know what you mean. It's like an ice pick. And I'll go to the bar that has the guy I don't like, and I'll find his car, and I do his tires. This is the level of consciousness he was at. That's what I do for fun. That's how I enjoy life.
Yeah.
And I have every right to do that because people hurt me so I can hurt them back. It was the eye for an eye kind of mentality. He was miserable. because he was always angry, always upset, always plotting and scheming how to get back at people. He lived in the world of revenge. As he started, at first when I talked to him about we live in a thought-created reality, he thought I was crazy. He says, "Oh yeah, you don't live in my world. That's just a bunch of crap." And I said, "Okay," but he kept coming back. He was court mandated, but I've had other people just sit there with their arms crossed and go, "La, la, 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 la." So he's taken something in, and then he starts telling me stories like, I saw he was on his third marriage. All of them involved either him being abusive to his wife, or one time he married a woman bigger than him and she was abusive toward him. He told nobody but me because that was very unmanly. So he had all these kids. They all hated him. And he saw one of his daughters out across the street in the city. He lived in the city. She was drinking beer at 12 years old or something. Maybe she was a little older, 14.
Right.
He runs out of the house because he had stopped drinking while we were working. He had been drinking a case of beer before noon. I don't know how he was still walking around, but he had been doing that. His brothers were all in prison, and he lived in that world. He runs across the street, slaps the beer out of her hands, yells at her, "What are you doing? Didn't you see what that's done to my life?" And all of a sudden, 2 19-year-old boys jumped him, threw him to the ground, broke his ribs, broke his nose, just kicking him. And so he's in the hospital. The police come in, and they say, "We've been after those 2 guys. We want you to testify against them." And he said, he was still really upset. He says, "I'm in no mood right now to make that decision. You're going to have to come back later when I'm calmer." They go, what are you talking about? And he said, no, come back later. I'll talk to you, but I'm in no mood. And they came back, and he said, "I've decided not to press charges." They go, "Why?" And he said, "Because in my world, I know what will happen if I do. They'll find out I pressed charges against them or got them arrested. They'll come looking for me, and it'll be even worse next time. I know this world of revenge. I don't want to do that anymore." More and more, he told story after story after story where he could have gotten violent, and he just, "No, I don't want to live that way anymore." Okay,
Right.
best part of the story. Later on, he sees the same daughter in the street, and he walks up to her, and this is the first time he's talked to her since this incident. He comes up to her and said, "Sweetie, I just want to apologize. I mean, I just really lost it and came running out, and I was angry, and I slapped your beer away. I never should have done it that way. I'm really sorry. I don't want to be that kind of father with you." She's like going, "Who the hell are you?"
Yeah.
And he says, "Listen, I just got a new apartment." Part of, as he got healthier, he got a job for the first time instead of being drunk all day. He got a job. He's managing apartments. He gets a really nice new apartment. He says, and he's so proud of it, and he kept it clean. He invites her to see his new apartment. She says, "Do you mind if I bring a couple of friends?" He says, "No, not at all." Goes around the corner, comes back with the 2 19-year-old boys. He said, "Whoa, I had some thoughts, and then I just didn't want to be that way. That's how I've always lived." And he let it go. He's discovering free will, that I don't have to hold those thoughts anymore. And when I don't, they go away. And then I don't become stupid or dumb. I become healthier. So he said, oh, what the heck? You guys can come along too if you want to. Now, they're very suspicious that he's going to get back at them, so they're cautious. But they go. They go to his new apartment, and he's showing them around and showing them everything, and he's so proud. And come here, guys, look at this. And all of a sudden, they couldn't take it anymore, and they pull him into a bedroom and close the door, and they say, we don't get it. Why are you being so nice to us after we did what we did to you? And he said, well, I used to live in the world of revenge. It makes no sense to me anymore. I don't want to live that way. He says, besides, I've been talking to this guy, and he's been teaching me about thought. He starts talking to him about the principles. Those two guys, 19-year-old, didn't have healthy father figures themselves. They started coming around every night and hanging out on his front step with him, and he became their unofficial father, and they really connected.
What a story.
He would tell me story after. He still calls me up after all these years just to say hi and tell me how he's doing. He said, when I first met you, when I walked down the street, I was so miserable, I would have gladly traded places with anybody I walked past. He says, now I walk down the street, I don't see a single person I would want to change places with. I don't see anybody who's as happy as I am. And he created a whole new life. He got married to a woman who was at a much higher level of well-being. So he had a really happy marriage. I was at his wedding. He hasn't once gotten into trouble. He even talked the state into letting him take a driver's course, and he got his license back, and then he had his own truck, and he was so proud.
That sounds like an incredible story of transformation. And I heard many of those today, and it just feels like, oh, whoa, this is something that has real intense impact, beyond just making it a little less bad, you know. Regarding the question of why doesn't wisdom interfere a bit earlier, why doesn't wisdom interfere a bit earlier? Like he already did somehow,
but we don't have the level of understanding to realize it.
So what you're saying is, for example, we currently have a war in Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people died. You talked about speaking to people in Ukraine. Wouldn't it be possible, you know, for wisdom to create some kind of thinking inside of persons who started the war, you know? I'm just curious about the fact that it being boundaryless, all knowing, like the typical view of God, you know, it's like all knowing, all powerful. Why is there so much death? Why is there so much suffering still?
Consciousness itself is evolving. Life itself is evolving. The human species is evolving. It takes, you can look at anything in life over time has evolved and changed. And the human species, my meager, I'm going in over my head now, right? Okay. There was one point in the history of the human species where we didn't know that we could think or were thinking. We just lived like primally. And then over evolution, people start to stand up instead of crouch so they can see up over the grass or reach something higher. And so our physiology starts changing. And at the same time then, now because we're higher and it's easier to see what's going on, our cortex starts growing and getting bigger. And so it becomes a more well-developed cortex. So it's like life providing the possibility for conceptual thought and thinking so you can plan and make and have human speech. That's an evolution. I watched my little grandson being born, and then when he was like a year and a half, he starts realizing that there are words that you can use to describe something in the world.
Yeah.
And he'd sit on my lap, very active kid, for half an hour looking out the window, and then would go, bird, bird. And every single time he saw a bird, he'd be just as excited. And it was like thrilling to him.
Yeah.
He could use a word to communicate with me, and I could understand what he meant, and we could share that.
Right.
That's evolution. It's part of an evolution. And so now we've evolved this great capacity for conceptual thinking, but now we have to evolve beyond over-relying on that for everything.
Right.
So there's an evolution in consciousness. So, there's a different way to use your mind. When you can use your mind to think about anything you want to, but when it starts creating stress, there's another way of using your mind. You let go of your cortex, your conscious thinking, your personal thinking, your limited conceptual thinking, and you fall into a more open, receptive knowing that transcends the limitation of any of those concepts. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, we're evolving. And so as people start to catch on to how that works, it's sort of like you're given a computer, but you're not given the instruction manual, because people have to evolve their cortex enough to be able to write the instruction manual.
Yeah.
Right? So now we're born as human beings with no instruction manual for how to be human and what it means to be human and what the being is and how the invisible part is more important ultimately than the visible part.
The whole notion of evolution, though, is not really kind of a necessity based on this idealistic worldview of what really happens is pure consciousness and all is included within it. Why not a world without war, without suffering, without pain, without rape, without murder? In theory, nothing would kind of, like, those phenomena seem to make a lot of sense in a materialistic worldview, where everybody kind of has to survive and we evolve in a civilization, as it does in a worldview where who we really are is pure love and pure beauty and pure wisdom.
A guy named Dr. Roger Mills learned the principles from Syd Banks. And he goes, anyone can have insight into these principles. He goes to United Way, the charity organization, and said, I would like to get a grant from you to go into what you consider to be the lowest functioning community in the United States. And I'll go in and we're going to have a working hypothesis that delinquents in the community can learn things and become healthy. And he said, well, that's great. What are you going to do? And I'm going to teach them about thought. I said, yeah, but what are you going to do to help these kids? I'm going to teach them about thought and about innate well-being. And yeah, but what are you going to, he said, that's what I'm going to teach them, because that's what people don't know. And if these kids learn that, their lives will change. They'll become healthier. So he went into this community, and over a 3-year period of time, the people themselves, as they got healthier, figured out their own way of how to get rid of the drug dealers. which changed it from a drug culture to a healthier culture. The violent rate in that community dropped. There were no murders in that community for like 6 years, when it was one of the highest murder rates in the United States. The teen pregnancy rate was 75%, and that dropped down to like 10%.
There's a book about that, right?
Modello.
Yeah.
Wrote a book about that. Jack Pransky wrote a book of Dr. Jack Pransky, who was big in the field of prevention, was blown away when the principals were creating change in communities that had never happened before. So here's a large group of people living at levels of conflict and violence and drug abuse and suffering, within 3 years' time become such a healthy community that Today's Show in the United States did a whole special feature on them, and then this book was written, and then other communities in the United States said, we have the same problem, would that work here? And gradually Roger Mills ended up developing like 20 of these huge community projects with similar results in each one. That's the hope. There's a lot of research that say everybody thinks there's more violence in the world, when actually research is showing overall there's less violence. Overall in the world there's less violence. Overall things are evolving and changing and improving. But the news only looks at the very worst of the worst. People don't get the good news. For every act of violence, there's 10,000 acts of kindness. That doesn't get talked about, reported. So people grow up thinking the world is this way. People are this way. People are violent. People are this. People are that. It doesn't mean that the world isn't, as Syd would say, at a dangerously low level of consciousness. But he says, but we have the answer now. We know what to teach people. We know what to share with people to help raise their level of consciousness. We know how to help people move toward more peaceful ways, peaceful and loving ways of living life. That's encouraging. I'm hopeful. I'm seeing it spread into war-torn areas. I'm seeing it spread. It just, person by person, raising their level of consciousness, and then it doesn't just impact them, it impacts the people they come in contact with every day. In transcendental meditation research, they say 20% of a city starts meditating and the crime rate drops down and all the dysfunctional rates fall away. We would see in big companies, you don't need to have everybody living in well-being. You get 20% of the people living in well-being. The whole company changes. An unbelievable shift in how people in that company operate toward service rather than self-achievement, you could say.
Is there a right and wrong way to live life?
Without making any judgment, we can say, if you're in the sun and getting a sunburn and you're starting to really burn, it makes sense to move into the shade. So you could say, it's right to move toward what's best for you and the whole. So when a group of people move toward what's best for the whole, the community, the people thrive. When people move toward what's best for me personally and my way of doing things, my way of thinking, it creates dysfunction, unhealth. So you can say this intelligence is built into us to move us toward a healthier way of being. Or it wouldn't be called wisdom. I get quiet, I feel better, and I become much more stupid, and then I start killing people. And I mean, the beautiful thing is unhappy people are desperate to look for doing something that when they do it, they feel better.
Right.
But as you become happier, you don't have to do those things in order to feel better. You already feel better. So then the dysfunctional behaviors fall away.
So what is happiness related to? Is it related to a level of consciousness then? Is that the only factor for happiness?
Oh no, that's above my pay grade. I don't know. Let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
When I was teaching high school, I thought it would be really helpful and healthy for kids to have experiences in community rather than just in an academic classroom. So I'm an English teacher, and I had a friend who was a social studies history teacher, and the two of us made a proposal to the school that we would have a joint class that would be twice as long, and it'd be in the afternoon, where we would bring together things from history and from literature to help focus on being kind and helpful people of service. And so we do a semester in the classroom reflecting on what it is to be kind, loving, of service people. And then second semester, we'll go into the community, into organizations or institutions where they're trying to help people. So some kids went into like elementary schools to help teachers with kids. I would take a group of people into the state hospital, into the locked ward with the oldest people in the state hospital who mostly had no family or friends. They were just locked away in there because there was no place else for them to be. This is an old kind of institution with big keys and locks, and people are psychologically challenged, you could say. So I had like a group of 8 kids with me. We'd go in 4 afternoons a week into the state hospital. And I told them at first, I said, listen, you're going to see people behaving in ways you're not used to seeing, but you don't have to worry. None of these people have ever been violent, so you're safe, and there's staff and there's people, and I'll be there with you, and you don't have to worry about being safe, but you're going to see some pretty strange things. People talking to themselves and thinking there's other people there, or getting frightened, and we'll just show up, be present, listen, and be kind. Period. And I said, I have to tell you about one guy, Frank. You're going to walk in, and he wears his wingtip shoe on his head, and that alone, you just have to watch this guy. It never falls off all day long. It's unbelievable, no matter what he's doing. He has such good balance. It's like a hat. And so you'll know who Frank is. But when he gets insecure or frightened, he doesn't talk at all, but he swears when he gets frightened. They've never heard him talk the whole time he's been there. And I said, so if he starts swearing, it just means he's scared, and it's not about you. It's about him just being frightened. So we walk in the first day, and of course the kids are a little, it's this old, like prison almost. And then start seeing people or walking around and in a daze or talking to themselves. And we come into this day room, and I see Frank sitting over there, and there's 8 of us coming in. And I go, okay, well, they're going to experience Frank, because I see him getting agitated. Who are these people? What are they doing? He stands up and he walks right up. And in our group, there was one very small, quiet, shy girl. He walks right up in her face. And she lets him go on, and then he stops for a second. She goes, "Oh, hi. You must be Frank. Nice to meet you." And it unnerved him, but it settled him down. So he walked back and sat down. So I watched her during the afternoon. We would go around and talk to people, and unbelievable how we could help these people when they settled down and got more present. You'd see their health coming out. Mm-hmm. I watched this young girl, very soft-spoken. She walked around talking to people. And then she went over, and it was so beautiful. She sat down, this is dear Liza. She sat down next to Frank and didn't want to scare him, so she just sat quietly and didn't look at him, didn't say anything. And she could sense when he started to relax. And then she turned, said, "I've been," and just talking to him like she would a friend. "I've been having a good day, Frank. I was at school, and my favorite subject is this, and then I go home. I've got a family at home. Do you have a family, Frank?" And she just talked to him this way, just softly, and he wouldn't look at her. Every day, she'd spend time with Frank, just talking to him as if he was her best friend. Halfway through the semester, Frank turned toward her and started talking. He had never talked in years, and he had been mute. And he started talking to her. It's contagious. Well-being is contagious. People that I work, like kids, when I work with kids, they come into my office. They can tell whether I see them as damaged goods or healthy kids that I love, who I know are just caught up and having some trouble. They can tell. I don't have to say a word. They can tell. And you can't hide it. It's in your eyes. It's in your tone of voice. I had a little boy, 8 years old, total, the biggest troublemaker in the school, run into my office for the first time, pull open my desk drawer, throw stuff out, knock over my antique lamp given to me by my father-in-law, and it breaks. And I go, "Hi, you must be Billy. Hey, Billy, come here. I want to show you something. I got this cool little fossil. Do you know what a fossil is, Billy? Do you know what animal this is? A vertebrae. You know what this is, a vertebrae?" And I said, "Come here, let me just," and I run my thumb down his back. "Feel those bumps? Those are, you got a lot of these in your back. You have a lot of these inside, but this is big. So what kind of animal do you think this was?" See, he's just getting present. He's coming out of his insecure, angry, upset thinking. He's getting present. It's only in the present moment that well-being shows up in people. But it will show up if people get quiet and present enough. They fall out of their angry, upset, insecure, fearful thinking. So pretty soon he's sitting on the floor, and I don't know what kind of animal. It must be really big. Is it a elephant? Is it a? And I said, actually, it came from a prehistoric shark. He was so excited. An animal with big teeth that bites. I mean, he was a biter and got into trouble because he'd bite kids. I said, "This is a shark." I said, "Do you know how old this is?" And he says, "A year, is it a year old?" I said, "No, it's really old." "Oh, 10 years. I said, "No, what's the oldest number you know?" He goes, 100. I said, "This is 30 million years old." It's like given to me by a marine biologist who was intrigued, fascinated. Right? Unbelievable how once he began to see that he could trust me, that he would drop into that space almost immediately as soon as he came into my office.
Man, Dicken, your stories are really, really unbelievable today. The amount of change, of impact, of spontaneous, realization.
I see it all the time. See, that's what I know, why if you point people towards something that's true for them and everybody, it helps people be more understanding of them and everybody.
Yeah.
And that really does something for people, Michael. It really does something. I'm part of a greater intelligence does something for people.
Yeah.
I have what I need when I'm open to it, and it'll help me and be there for me. It really does something for anybody, right? Somebody called me up a few weeks ago with a teenager who was suicidal. We had 3 sessions. We're done. The father keeps writing me almost every day. I can't believe I've got my daughter back. She's happy. She's laughing all the time. She's joined this team and she has made new friends, and it's just she got out of her fearful, insecure, upset thinking and began to discover how beautiful life can be when you understand how that works.
It's
that could have been years of therapy without nearly the same result if we had gone into her past and had her think about all the horrible things that were happening in her life or had happened.
Does it work with everybody?
No. People need a certain degree of willingness to not want to suffer anymore. And some people are so wedded to their thinking that they would rather suffer than think they didn't have it right, or they're so hopeless. But I can never tell who that person is, because I've had people that I thought would never change who became completely different people. I had other people I thought, oh man, they're going to love this. And they never get out of their thinking enough to listen so they can have insight.
Is that the only condition? Are there more?
It was the only one I've seen. I can say there were 5 clients I couldn't help to some degree. But it used to be much higher percentage than, I've been doing this 45 years when I became a psychologist, and to have 5 people that I thought, I didn't make them worse, but they didn't hear anything new or different, have any insights. So there is something about readiness that we don't fully understand. But even with Syd, there were some people that couldn't hear Syd because they kept thinking they knew what he was talking about, so they never got beyond their ideas of what he was saying. So they had an intellectual understanding, but that doesn't help people.
Yeah, I feel we could talk another 5, 6, 7 hours, but we don't have them.
Yeah.
Would you be okay with a quicker round of questions and answers?
Yes.
Reading your book, I noticed sometimes you refer wisdom and the principles as something we can use as tools, as gifts.
Yeah.
And sometimes it seems like you're more pointing to that they just represent what we really are, just a pointer to who we really are. How does that make sense?
If I gave you a computer, I could do 2 things. I could talk to you about how it works. Here's how you do emails. Here's how you do that. Our intellect is a tool. that's given to us at birth. It's part of evolution, and it's a very cool thing. I love having an intellect. I love being able to think conceptually and have language and share that and to have memory that's stored that I can draw on, all the memories of all the great things that have happened in my life. That's utilizing your intellect as a tool. That's utilizing it wisely. But you don't go to a computer, no matter how sophisticated, for love or wisdom. You go for really cool information. You Google all kinds of cool shit. You really do. It's really fun.
Right.
But as soon as you try to use your computer for something it wasn't intended for, it's a beautiful system. It'll start creating contraction. And that's an indication it's time, like we tell our kids, you've had enough screen time. Put your phone down. So this, in human being, is saying, Dicken, you've had enough screen time. You're trying too hard to find answers in your computer. You won't find them there. Close your laptop, and there's another way to use your mind. It's all one mind, but it's just different ways of using the same mind. So then you get, what Syd would say, you get very good at going back and forth between the intellect and then being open to wisdom. And the two work harmoniously, and you get the best of both worlds. One of his talks, the best of both worlds. So you don't throw away your computer, you use it more and more wisely. But you, as a president of a company, said, as I was really good at using my intellect, and I'm president of the company. But I didn't know I had an even greater resource to draw on. And now I can draw on that, and it's making me even a better leader. He was a phenomenal leader, full of love and compassion, and really was able to listen to people and inspire people.
Right.
And draw out their well-being, and oh my God.
I'll restate my question. Are we the principles, or are they a gift we can use?
Both.
And
that's the paradox about spiritual teaching. We're human and we're beings, and both are true. So if you talk about just on a physical level, this is true. On a level beyond the physical, there's a whole different dimension of reality.
Is one truer than the other? Is one of a higher level of consciousness, one of a lower?
Is a wave truer than the water beneath it? The wave is the form the ocean takes. And I used to think I was just a little human wave. And so I was always comparing myself to other people, saying, I want to be a bigger wave like that person. What workshops do I have to take? What books do I have to read to become bigger, wiser, more intelligent? And Syd comes along and says, you think you're a wave, you're more than that. He said, Dicken, look within, look down. This quiet, open, vast space of pure consciousness. And he said, if you look in that direction, you'll discover unbelievable beauty. And you won't find it, but it'll be revealed to you.
Yeah. With the ask of some quick answers, so we can go through some more questions. Is this true for humans only? What about animals?
They're lived by the same forces as we are.
Literally no difference on that spiritual level.
These creative life forces are the essence of everything that exists. Trees, animals, people.
Can animals recognize thought?
I have a dog. Sometimes I think he knows more than I do, so I don't know exactly how to answer that question.
What's the biggest thing psychology as a field misses or underestimates? What's the next step?
I don't. In traditional indigenous cultures, wisdom has been a part of the worldview. Always, spirit and wisdom have always been part of an indigenous worldview, and for 200 years, psychology moved into what could be seen, measured, recognized, visible. But now you have, you want short answers, okay.
No, please continue.
I found this fascinating. The researchers at NASA, North American Space Agency, some of the top scientists in the United States, have been studying the energy of our universe for years and years and years. And they came out with a study lately that I've seen. I looked it up and looked at it, and they say very clearly, if you take everything in our universe, our galaxy, not the multiverses, because that's infinite, but our galaxy, and you measure the energy of every single thing that can be seen with instrumentation. So from the largest stars and planets in our galaxy to the things that can be seen with subatomic microscopes, the teeniest particles that can be seen or measured. And you add up the energy of everything that has form. It only accounts for about 4% of the energy of the whole universe. 96% of the energy of our universe is formless.
So you're referring to dark matter, dark energy?
Yes. And this is what people have realized, is that we're more than just our physical being, more than just our bodies. I used to think who I am is what I think, what I feel. It's my body. Here it is. That's 4% of who I am. That's not my real self. That's just my visible self.
So the short answer would be wisdom.
The short answer of what's been missing and is missing is that we're connected to a vast universal intelligence. Without that, people are lost. We're just little individual bodies bumping around, and its cause and effect is only on a physical scene level.
Right.
So psychology can evolve if it can say what causes us our experience, and we can only point to something in the known physical world. It's very, very, it becomes unscientific, and answers can't be found looking at it that way.
When an atheist, physicalist person is coming to you, to your practice.
They're sometimes the most spiritual people I meet because they don't like concepts.
I wanted to ask you about that. It's quite astounding for me that like monist explanation of reality, so everything is matter or everything is spirit, come to quite similar conclusions, may more often compared to like a dualist version of there's mind and matter.
Yes.
For example, concepts like most physicalists and idealists agree that we all perceive concepts all the time. Do you have any idea why those are so similar?
I don't understand your question. Maybe you could ask it a different way. Or?
Yeah, like when somebody who believes everything is in fact matter and there is no mental stuff going on, like consciousness is all just matter in a certain category, in a certain interface, you know. Yeah. And then you ask an idealist and they say, no, everything is just, you know, mental stuff, everything is consciousness. Both agree on, you know, everything is what we see is conceptual. Like this is not a real studio light we're seeing here, it's just particles, or it's just consciousness. But then this is kind of an area of agreement. Like, and this, it seems like to be the case more often when there's a monist worldview, that everything comes from the same stuff, no matter if it's physical or consciousness. Any idea why there's so much overlap? And any idea of how to, like, if there's a materialist or physicalist person listening right now, anything to convince them or to offer them maybe a hand in this new world?
I've worked with a lot of scientists. I've worked with a lot of people with incredibly high IQs, and they're curious. True scientists are curious. So I ask a biologist, famous biologist, I say, I'm very curious about the human heart. It's something in the human body that's always moving. What causes the heart to do this? He says, well, we know that. The heart's just an organ and it's a muscle organ and it's contracting. I'm interested in source. So I say, what causes a muscle to contract? He says, oh, we know that. In the heart, there are long cells, striated cells, and a cell shortening is what a contraction is. What causes a cell to contract? He says, oh, we know that. Inside the cell, there's sudden burst of electrical chemical activity because it takes energy to contract. What causes a burst of electrical chemical activity? What creates that burst of energy? He said, wow, Dicken, some of us biologists like talking about that when human beings are born, there's a biological life force that is capable of generating electrical chemical activity. I thought, that's fascinating. See, we've gone from organ to cell to energy to force. So I say, what creates the biological, what causes the biological life force in human beings? And he got really quiet. Now, here's a true scientist because he's curious. He wasn't arrogant. He got really quiet and he was really reflecting and going quiet for a long time. And he looks right at me. He says, Dicken, no one has ever asked me that question. He says, you're really asking what's the source of life? And I said, yeah, do you guys talk about that? I mean, biology is the study of life. Do you talk about what creates life? And he says, well, now you'd have to use words like spirit or God or ultimate energy or something. And I said, yeah, do you guys talk about how that's the source of biological functioning? He says, no, we don't really talk about that. See, this is the new ground in science. If you take any science, you can do this. Come back toward true causation. And we've just assumed that things in the physical world are ultimate causes, and they're not. You can take anybody that gets curious about that. And we didn't know that that would make so much difference for people. But to have someone go, I'm not just this insecure, screwed up biological mechanism that was born with defects in my physical system, so I'm always going to be this way. And the world makes me feel the way I feel, so I'm a helpless victim. He said, no, you're part of the same. Syd would say to anybody with enormous confidence and knowing, you have as much wisdom as any other human being on this planet because you're connected. It's like saying to any wave on the ocean, no matter how small you are, you're as much ocean as anybody else here. And that's true. And it's truth. The physicist is saying the 4% is connected to the 96%, and it's an interplay of energy. Right? So To bring that into psychology, into sociology, into history, it grounds it in a deeper dimension of truth. It changes the course of study and ultimately the course of what research is done and what's considered worthy of trying to understand better. William James, the father of American psychology, said, if ever psychology discovers the fundamental principles, it'll be a discovery more important than the discovery of fire for mankind.
You're suggesting those three principles are that discovery?
They are. They've always been. Doesn't matter what you call them. To say that there's an energy of life, and out of that energy it knows how to create life, and it's a mystery no one can explain, but we can all say that is the only thing that it can explain clearly how things work the way they do.
When you have such amazing stories and experiences, you must have talked with colleagues of yours, and some of them must have might not have been able to buy into that or had their skepticisms. What is the most common doubt colleagues of yours have?
Well, they hear us talk about thought, and they don't know we're talking about universal creative force of thought behind all human experience. So they say, telling people that their feelings are just thoughts is dangerous and harmful. Because then they'll just try and think positive, and people who have been through abuse and trauma, if you just tell them you're fine, just think positive, is dangerous and it'll make them worse. It doesn't get to what's really going on. But I can tell you, I found nothing that helps people have painful memories to find out that those memories are not the past. There is no past. We don't have a past. We've carried memories with us through time, and it's normal for them to be activated sometime. And when they do, it creates a feeling. And if you know that it's just thought, it doesn't frighten you, and you don't keep holding it as true, and you're free. You become free of that memory. It won't hurt you. And that's how people naturally get over trauma and pain and suffering. Naturally. It's just thought in the moment being created. You don't have to hold on to it.
At the same time, you're saying nobody is to blame for holding on to it. It's an innocent misunderstanding.
Totally innocent. Yes, that's beautiful, Michael. You're doing the best you can. We all have misunderstandings at times about this. And there's times when I get caught up in my thinking, it sure seems true, seems real.
You spoke of us being able to recognize those principles, to feel them. Despite, and that's not a quote of yours, like what I'm thinking is despite of them not being in form, like they are in the background, they are the context of our experience, they are the source of our experience. How can we experience something that isn't form when all we experience is thought? That seems like a little bit of a contradiction.
There's a knowing that goes beyond the contradictions, the physical form. It would be like saying, because they're not separate. I love that these metaphors have been around for centuries. You have the ocean. It takes form, goes back, it makes waves like this. That's like life taking form, existing in form, going back into the formless field of energy.
Yeah.
So from one perspective, a wave is born, it lives, and then it dies. From another perspective, nothing changes, just water. Nothing dies, just comes and goes. It's nice for me to think of my experiences as just temporary waves, that just part of the ocean. And if I'm aware of my oceanness, I don't freak out about my turbulent waveness. I'm just having a low mood. It's not a big deal. I feel like killing somebody, but I know it's just thought, and I know it'll pass. I know it won't last. I know always when my thinking quiets down, there's love, there's happiness, there's peace. That's our true nature. I've seen no exception to that with any person I've worked with over the years in all different countries and cultures. You can learn to, in a sense, intuit and see the health in people and have compassion for them when they're caught up. Doesn't mean you go along with their behavior or agree with them, but you can have compassion for people caught up in suffering and acting out of that suffering.
Yeah. Well, you, I don't know if you mentioned it during the time we were live, or we just talked about it privately, but you're writing a new book with Natasha, your colleague. Can you talk a little? Are you ready to give some kind of teaser about it, or is it still completely a secret?
I mean, we've been working on this. Our first book, we worked together for 2 years, and this one, it's been over a year. And this time being together, we came up with a title of A Life of Ease, a simple truth that will set you free. That's the subtitle. And we're trying to write a book that I could give any person on the street. We have a lot of people that have been learning the 3 principles, but they have family and spouses and kids and friends. And this would be the kind of book they could go, this isn't academic, this is just a simple way of learning about, we think, we're aware, we're connected to deeper feelings and knowing in a way that makes it ordinary and down to earth and simple. And so we're trying to write that book, and maintain the magic and the mystery, but also make it very simple and down to earth, simple examples.
If some of our listeners and viewers want to find out more about your work, where could they find it?
I had a friend who had mercy on me because I'm a little technologically challenged, and she lives in Chile, but she offered to put together my YouTube channel. And I've given tons of talks and seminars. Like the first year of the pandemic, I gave like 73 webinars. I think I got paid for 7 of them. Just opportunity to talk about this and get the word out. And a lot of those have been recorded, and so she put them on my YouTube channel. And that's a good, just on YouTube, you go Dicken Bettinger's channel.
We'll link it in the description of the video.
Okay. I have a website that I try to keep updated. I'm not super good at it, but it's called 3 Principles Mentoring. And through the website, you can always contact me if you have a question. So,
is there something we didn't spoke about today that you would? Is there something we didn't spoke about today you would like to speak about now?
I would never have been interested in these 3 principles if it didn't help me find more love in my life. But I mean love of life, love of people that I didn't used to love of my kids, love of how human we are. And it's one of the things I have seen over the years. I don't care who the client is, from the head of a multi-billion-dollar company to anybody just walking around. When people learn the principles, when we have less thinking, we're more present, so our senses come alive. Less thinking is peace of mind. When our senses come alive, that really is what happiness is. Oh, God, it's so beautiful. Oh, I love this food. Oh, love this music. Oh, and our senses come alive. That's happiness. And then you can't help but to intuit your connection with life, because we are intimately one and connected. That's what love is. So the principles will help anybody become more peaceful, happier, and more loving. But to me, love is the most important. Fall in love with life, with people, with possibilities, with hope for humanity. Is just, that has gotten stronger and stronger each year I've been reflecting on these principles.
Beautiful. We're in a recording studio right now, and they usually record jazz musicians. They usually record jazz musicians.
Yeah.
So we'll have a
Yes.
Steinway here, Steinway D. So I'm going to play a bit, and we're going to record it. And I wanted to ask you for a word or a phrase or a picture or anything that I can have in the back of my mind when improvising.
Well, I mentioned my friend who is the drummer, professional drummer, who said sometimes it feels like I'm no longer here thinking about my music and what I'm doing, and it's just flowing through me. The other guy shows up and I can do things I couldn't ever imagine doing. There's a creative improvisational capacity in everybody where we surprise ourselves with what comes out, or the ease with which it comes out. And that's what I love about the creative process. People will love music, people will love art, and to find out that at core, everybody is creative. People used to say, I'm not creative. I said, oh, you're creating all these realities you're living in. You're unbelievably creative. You're using the energy of the universe to create your personal reality. And so there's a flow, a spontaneity, an ease, an openness, a receptivity. Those are favorite words of mine. So
thank you very much. And
you're a great musician, Michael, so I'd love to hear some of your flow.
That's very kind of you. And it was very kind of you to agree to this. It was just a big joy. It was so fun speaking with you about all of those topics.
Oh, great. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming.